As you know, there were a lot of perk and gameplay changes in this update, and a lot of them will have significant effects on Ghostface. Three of the perks that I use, barbecue and chili, corrupt, and pop, have all been nerfed or reworked in some way, and we might have to reconsider our build after the update drops. So before we consider potential new builds post update, we need to talk about our what my main build actually seeks to accomplish. So corrupt is important for getting early stocks before significant gen progress is done, especially since a lot of the gens at the corner of the map can be pretty hard to stock, and those get blocked early on. So the less favorable gens for you, aka the middle gens, are usually the first ones that survivors reach, and besides, before they get to them, you might still have time to stock them and plan your next move rather than being forced to act immediately. Because without corrupt, you can't actually go around stocking the majority of the survivors. You have to down someone right away and hook them, and it might get a little complicated. Pop is especially good because you can plan your approach to a survivor a while before you actually down them. So the idea is to let them spend their time on the generator as long as they don't get it done, and then you can come by and down them and pop the gen right before it gets finished, hopefully. Of course, this requires a lot of game sense to know which gens are being done, as long as knowing how long they'll take to be completed. However, you have no way of knowing how many survivors are working on a particular gen, so multiple survivors could be stacked on a gen and get it done a lot quicker than you'd expect. So that's why discordance is important, and also with the potential of getting multiple stocks. Lastly, it's really important to know the exact locations of everyone right after you hook a survivor, because that sets up opportunities for advanced plays like baits and other methods which allow you to intercept rescuers and potentially force a second stage on the hook, at which case you can down them at a later point in the match. That's what Ghostface does best. His ability to concentrate a lot of damage onto a single survivor is unlike any other killer, and you really need to take full advantage on that in order to play the most efficiently. So now that we explained what the build is actually supposed to accomplish and what you're supposed to do as a Ghostface player, we need to see if it still holds true post-update. So a lot of changes were made to base kit killers, where you can now kick gens faster and apply a base percent regression, as well as gens in general taking longer to complete. And that's also helpful, but the nerfs to pop might be pretty significant, especially the part where it only regresses the amount of current progress rather than the total. So if you want to kick a gen that's only half done, you'll regress a much less amount of progress than you normally would. So since I think Ghostface requires a little bit of slowdown, we still need to take one perk that does that. Ruin, even though that got nerfed, I think it's still kind of decent, though its regression speed is the same as kicking a gen normally now, and there really is no problem in kicking a gen if you're waiting for your power to recover. And you can only get value from Ruin if you downed a person in that area and and there's no one else in the area to work on the gen, because if you try to say, for example, mark a survivor who's working on a gen in the open and hope they won't go back to it, that's really not going to work out, because their team will probably let them know that you're elsewhere as soon as you down them, or if the gen's in the open and they have a pallet nearby, they won't be afraid to work on the gen as they'll see you coming. So yeah, the only time you can actually get value from Ruin is if you down a person at a gen, at which case you can just kick the gen because it'll be the same amount of regression. There's also things like the Nat and Scorch hooks, The nat doesn't really work on Ghostie because, like I said, your strength is concentrating a lot of damage onto a few survivors, whereas the nat is best when you spread the damage around multiple people. And Scorch hooks are pretty RNG. Like, the hooks may not be in favorable positions, and say you want to hook someone in a corner to proceed to do a snowball play, like where you intercept rescuers and you hook someone in a pretty hidden corner so they can't call you out, but all the Scorch hooks might be out in the open, and that may not be a good situation for you. The new overcharge actually looks really good. So it regresses gens from 100% to 400% over the course of 30 seconds, which actually it is not a long time if you down and hook someone in that area, because you're not going to have survivors just rushing to get the save, and if they do, you can probably punish them for it. So you can assume it'll take around 30 seconds for someone to touch the gen after you hooked a person in that area. And within those 30 seconds, it'll actually regress the gen to an amount that's pretty similar to old Pop. Like, if this were the old gens, Pop would regress 20 seconds of a gen, and the new overcharge would do around 19 seconds for that gen. So it's actually pretty viable, and it pretty much does the same effects as old Pop, with the added bonus of being able to use it situationally, where you don't actually down a person in the area and you kick the gen before or after scaring the survivors off. I know a lot of people want to stack Call of Ryan and Overcharge, and that does regress the gen pretty fast, but I don't think this is a very optimal combo, because 2 of your perks are focused on regressing just 1 gen you've kicked. Though I think the new Overcharge already regresses the gen pretty significantly, and you don't need a second perk to stack on top of that. So you're going to be more efficient if you invested that perk slot into some other facet of your gameplay. But yeah, if you were a fan of old Pop and not the new one, just stick to Overcharge. It basically does the same thing, and it has a few additional benefits. I think Corrupt is still gonna be a main part of my build, but now that it deactivates as soon as you down a person, you need to spend more time going around and stalking players. But if you know that some players are already working on gens, then you're free to down, because the perk deactivating won't help the people who are already working on these gens. Discordance I'm still going to run, most likely. I still think it's the best Ghostface tracking perk, like I've mentioned, so yeah, I'm still keeping that. Now, what we have to worry about most are the survivor perk changes. Aura reading will likely be a bit more difficult due to off the record and distortion buffs, and there may be a good chance that we can no longer rely on barbecue for long distance information. Some alternatives could be Thrilling Tremors, though I'm not really a fan of the 60-second cooldown, and they won't really be helpful in knowing where a stealthy survivor, particularly one that you just hooked, might be hiding, because that survivor is unlikely to do gens right away if they know you're a good Ghostface and if they're also a good survivor team. Darkness Revealed might also find some use, though it has the same issue as auras being unreadable or falling out of favor this update, and has the issue of being more sporadic and RNG based than barbecue. Deadman Switch might come into play as well, though it'll only take effect when someone actually gets off a gen, which they're unlikely to do if they know you're not close by, so you won't have a lot of long range information about that, though it is helpful in knowing when someone is coming for a save. I actually used to use Rancor, and I might consider looking into that, as it's helpful in predicting which gens people might go to afterwards, and it also has the additional effect of the Mori at the end of the game, but you only get up to 5 charges out of that, and it might not be as efficient. I'll keep looking more into that, though I genuinely don't think there are enough good tracking perks in this game. They should make more consistent perks like Discordance and Barbecue that also don't have to rely on auras that can be hidden with survivor builds. Like maybe something that shows Killer Instinct every time you hook a person or something, or with some other condition, so it's different enough from Barbecue. There also have been changes to killer tracking perks for survivors, like Spine Chill has been nerfed, and it's confirmed to work only in the terror radius, so it will no longer affect stealth killers, but there will be perks to take its place. For example, I think the changes to Dark Sense make it a pretty viable anti-stealth killer perk, as the perk timer will activate when any killer steps within a certain range of them, and they'll go to cover immediately and also warn any teammates that are nearby. Though Dark Sense is token based basically, or generator based rather, so they only get one charge of it at a time before you can leave and then come back not too long afterwards to maybe down them, or at the very least you'll know they have some sort of perk like that and plan your movements afterward. Though I genuinely think people will run Premonition to counter stealth killers. People actually used Spine Chill as a sort of stealth killer tracking tool rather than just for the speed buffs, as some people might think. So Premonition basically does the same thing with a pretty small cooldown, and it also tells you the direction of the killer. You might think people won't run a perk just to counter a few select killers, but if you look at it from a comp scenario, for example, where people know which killer you're likely going to play, and they might take perks accordingly for that, where they'll be able to warn any nearby teammate that you're approaching anytime, because the cooldown is so small and there's not a whole lot you can do about that, as far as I think right now. Or if undetectable ever becomes more meta, you'll have people running anti-stealth perks like that more often. One killer perk that I think counters a majority of perks which normally work well against Ghostface is Play With Your Food. Even if you don't get it down right away, you can still spend a little time farming for stacks and build that into a proper snowball opportunity later. And I think it's going to be a really strong choice if a lot of Ghostface counters get used in the future. Sometimes I feel like it can be a hard carry for Ghostface, though against actual good players who know you're running the perk, they're going to hide their obsession a lot more, and you're going to have to learn how to play around that, which brings the whole tracking issue again. Maybe I'll still run Barbecue, depending on what they actually do to Off the Record. It seems like a lot of people don't like that perk for good reason, though there's probably more room for creative and effective builds. Regarding the other killer perks, maybe Lethal might be more useful on Ghostie, especially when paired with other killer perks or add-ons like the camera, though you already have Corrupt as an early game perk, and I don't think you can run Lethal over Corrupt, nor do I think it's efficient to run both. And frankly, you should learn your spawn points rather than having to know where everyone is at the beginning of the match. Knockout will definitely be fun to use, though the change wasn't that significant, but if you already enjoyed it before, then you'll probably enjoy it even more now. Small but spread out slowdown perks like Thanatophobia or Jolt are actually a bad idea on Ghostface in my opinion. You actually need to prioritize more concentrated slowdown so you can protect gens which are actually more favorable for you to stock, rather than just having passive slowdown basically on everyone. One perk I thought may come into more use is Monstrous Shrine, actually, because it'll make those snowball situations a lot easier to execute, but of course there are also Scourge perks, and They also make the basement into scorch hooks, though I would argue that the basements that you actually need the perk to protect are basements that are usually in the corner of the map, which you could probably protect by your own anyway. Whereas on maps that you need to make full use of the basement, like Rotten Fields and Wrecker's Yard, won't get you any use of Monstrous Shrine, since the basements are in the middle of the map and they're a lot harder to prevent survivors from going to rescue. We'll see though, I do think this perk does have a bit of potential, but it might be a little hard to execute sometimes. Eruption also got changed, and I think that'll be pretty handy, especially since I know people who do like Eruption on Ghostie, though I probably won't use it myself as it's kind of hard to go around the map and kicking all the gens. Though we'll see. Maybe we'll come up with some interesting builds. But yeah, let me know what perks you think might work or what you might want me to try out. Maybe I'll find some time to test those after I get the other World Tour videos done. I actually haven't been playing this game that much, though I do want to learn how to master all the maps with Ghostie, because each have their own interesting, unique playstyles. I want to go over maps like Rotten Fields and Blood Lodge and maybe the new map, the Garden of Joy, though we'll see when it comes to that. I haven't used any map offerings during the event because I wanted to farm enough points with Flans, though I'll definitely be testing the maps a lot more now. By the way, I'm not sure how I'm only Prestige 6 with Ghostface, as I have literally thousands of add-ons. Maybe it's because I never actually prestiged Ghostie. But yeah, good luck, and I'll see you in the next one.